China under President Xi Jinping and Fei 39's vision aims to dethrone the United States and become the world in 39's leading superpower by 2049, coinciding with the 100th anniversary of the 39's victory over the Nationalist Army. To realize this ambition, Beijing has sought a path to maritime dominance by extending its greedy and Kowtung southward, strengthening its military power and presence in a particularly important area known as the South China Sea. One of the key measures they have employed is the rapid construction and militarization of artificial islands. However, this strategy of the South China Sea is actually heading towards disaster, even threatening to destroy all their previous efforts. The question is, why? If you are interested, let N39s explore the reasons below. Before we begin, if you find the military knowledge content useful and interesting, done in Faith 39, forget to leave a like and subscribe, and click the bell icon to receive notifications as soon as the channel has the latest video. Thank you for your 39s. Experience more interesting things together. Now, let in Faith 39s get to the main. As mentioned in the video, the South China Sea will be where China starts which we in 39 link below. The description states that this sea area located east of Vietnam holds a particularly important role economically and geostrategically. It is estimated that this area contains at least 11 billion barrels of oil, equivalent to 1.6 billion tons of oil, 77 billion cubic meters of natural gas, various types of soil and rare metals, which are the backbone of the economy. We also cannot ignore the significant amount of methane hydrate. As you may already know, methane hydrate, also known as combustible ice, is formed from natural gases such as methane, ethane, propane, and water under high-pressure conditions, above 30 atmospheres, combined with low temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius. Methane hydrate usually exists stably in deep seabed conditions, at least from above 300 meters, underwater islands and solid permafrost regions. In the context of the depletion of traditional energy sources, such as coal, peat, and natural gas, methane hydrate, with quantities more than twice that of fossil fuels, is considered a highly efficient clean energy source and a potential future alternative fuel. According to expert calculations, the entire South China Sea region currently ranks second in Asia in methane hydrate reserves, and Vietnam possesses a considerable amount of this resource. Furthermore, the South China Sea is home to one of the world and A39's strongest fishing industries, accounting for 15% of the total global fisheries potential. In addition, it is a crucial junction on the world in 39's second largest and busiest trade route after the Mediterranean Sea. According to an assessment conducted in each year, 5.3 trillion, equivalent to 22% of the total value of international trade, passes through the South China Sea, including 40% of the total value of seafood. The world in 39's oil reserves account for 6% of the world in Fee 39's maritime trade and 1/3 of the total global shipping volume. Simply put, whoever controls the South China Sea will control the fate of all the nations dependent on it, and no one other than China is clearly demonstrating its ambition to achieve this. The pretext for its increasingly aggressive actions in the South China Sea is the infamous 9-line map, claiming sovereignty over 90% of 39's surface area, including the and Spratly Islands, based on an utterly unreasonable claim that is not recognized by anyone except China itself. China has proceeded to build artificial islands and militarize them with airports, airfields, radar stations, air defense weapons, and anti-aircraft equipment. With these artificial islands, Beijing believes it can easily protect its trade, freely exploit natural resources, and prevent access for other nations, or at least force them to pay the cost of utilizing resources in the South China Sea is considerable. However, the truth is that no matter how many artificial islands China builds strategically, the South China Sea remains within the first island chain. And as if this were an Fei 39 bad enough for Beijing, most countries in the territory belonging to this island chain, such as Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, have close ties, if not intimate, with China and 39's biggest strategic rival, the United States. It is thanks to this geopolitical link that the U.S. Navy can easily blockade a series of junctions between shipping routes around the South China Sea, thereby disrupting or even completely cutting off maritime transport to the mainland. The most important vital point is the Malacca Strait, an 800 kilometers long strait separating Malaysia and Singapore from Indonesia, and also the route through which ships carrying 90% of China and 39's commercial good, mostly natural gas, must pass. China and 39's excessive trade dependence on the Malacca Strait. This has led to a situation known as the Malacca Dilemma, and Beijing often uses this as a pretext to expand its territory in the region by building and militarizing artificial islands. China can theoretically bring more ships, aircraft, and missiles closer to Malacca and other hotspots to increase its influence and force the U.S. Navy to deploy more power to the first island chain. In short, China wants and needs to control the entities in the South China Sea, from reefs and islands to coral atolls, to secure and promote its own interests. In return, it sees other countries with sovereignty in the South China Sea and exclusive economic zones such as the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam being encroached upon by Beijing. Because, as is often the case in international relations, the strong will do what they are capable of doing, and the weak will bear the consequences. In reality, China has expanded its influence in the South China Sea through military means since 1975. In 1974, China seized the Paracel Islands from South Viet. However, it wasn't 1990 until 2012 that Beijing began its modern strategy after gaining control of the Scott Shoal from the Philippines. A year later, the mainland continued its expansion and began building artificial islands in the Spratly Islands, creating nearly 300 hectares of land and gradually militarizing them. Over time, China has a total of 28 outposts in the sea area it claims sovereignty over, according to the 9-line map, with 20 outposts located in the Paracel Islands, 7 in the Spratly Islands, and the Scott Shoal, which it has occupied, but not built on. Artificial island construction campaign is mainly concentrated in the archipelago. For those unfamiliar, artificial islands are created by dredging and transporting materials such as rocks and sand from coral reefs and seabed, then grinding them into powder and bringing them to the surface. In December 23, Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative reported that in recent decades the increased dredging and burying of coral reefs, along with the harvesting of giant clams, has severely damaged thousands of species found nowhere else on Earth. According to statistics from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSES, China has reclaimed a total of 13.5 km of land on coral reefs that it uses to build islands, including Bai Chao Cross Reef, Gaken Reef, Tunungia Reef, Gakma Reef, Sababai Reef. Currently, they are still carrying out this process at a breakneck pace thanks to the impressive capabilities of the super powerful construction vessels used to build islands. A prime example is the most powerful island-building super ship in Asia, the Tianquanhao, operated by Tianjin Construction Company, part of the China Communications Construction Group. It is capable of deploying a 6-tub cutting machine to a depth of 30 m and extracting 6,000 mevs of material per hour. In addition, Beijing also possesses the Tianquanhao, a vessel with a high capacity, with a 4,200 kW engine, a 30 m excavation depth, and a dredging speed of 400 cubic meters of material per hour from February to March 2014. This ship was detected conducting dredging operations at Gakma Reef in the Spratly Islands. Although the area is too small to accommodate aircraft, it can still be equipped with anti-aircraft weapons and radar, thereby enhancing China and 39's deep-sea defense in case of conflict. 2015, in a speech to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Admiral Harry Harris, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, called these artificial islands the NQuat, Great Wall of Sandquat, highlighting their importance to the 39's destiny in countering China and 39's NQuat, Great Wall of Sandquat construction campaign. The U.S. Navy has conducted freedom of navigation operations since, which have seen continuous movement and public exercises of naval vessels. The U.S. military presence around artificial islands is intended to project power, intimidate Beijing, and ensure that shipping lanes in the South China Sea remain open. However, freedom of navigation operations have largely failed to change the situation in the South China Sea, and near-conflict incidents between the two countries and A-39 militaries in the region, such as the near collision between a Chinese destroyer and a U.S. warship near the South China Sea. In 2018 have led some call for their withdrawal. The reason is that the risks outweigh the potential benefits, and the cost of maintaining international rules through military means has been rising beyond what the American people are willing to pay. On the other hand, security strategists from other countries believe that if the U.S. naval presence is not maintained, the people in 39's Liberation Army Navy of China will no longer face any obstacles in asserting and imposing its will on international shipping lanes, just like other nations. Therefore, ceasing freedom of navigation operations is essentially abandoning and ceding the South China Sea to Beijing and 39's free reign. However, fortunately for the United States and the weaker countries in the region, they may no longer need to make the effort to prevent mainland hegemony. Now, as the old saying goes, heaven has eyes, nature has intervened, and China and 39's artificial islands are beginning to erode and crumble, warning signs of disaster. For Beijing appeared as early as 2019, when the artificial islands were clearly not as stable as expected. The primary reason stems from the fact that the units responsible used often substandard construction methods and materials, specifically the concrete that China used to build bases on the islands is unsuitable for the basic natural conditions of the region. As a result, buildings are collapsing and foundations are turning into sponges under the impact of the harsh climate in the South China Sea, not to mention the destructive power, the devastating effects of tropical storms, coupled with rampant corruption in China and 39's construction industry, are directly impacting the nation and 39's military ambition. In 2019, Su Jiang and 3 other supervisors of the Luning aircraft carrier construction were tried for corruption and sentenced to 12 years in prison. A similar situation has occurred with artificial islands in the South China Sea. For China, speed and cost are top priorities, and Beijing and 39's excessive impatience has put pressure on those directly in charge of the projects, leading to a focus on quantity over quality and shortcuts it. Construction problematic concrete is one issue, and sometimes it in 39's not even poured properly, causing structural erosion on some islands. Similarly, like infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative and other major national construction projects, quality is not a top priority on artificial islands. Furthermore, China lacks extensive experience in constructing such structures. The structures were designed to withstand the environment of the South China Sea, but Beijing itself exacerbated the problem by refusing to call on foreign experts for assistance, partly to save face and partly to protect military secrets. As a result, the islands and infrastructure on them were not built with top quality materials or by leading engineers, making things worse. Weather and climate will also be a major headache for Zhongnanhai in the future. With current climate change and warming sea levels, the frequency of super typhoons in the South China Sea will increase. Just one typhoon making landfall in the wrong place could easily destroy structures built with poor quality concrete, and 39's regrettable loss, as Beijing has spent years on its artificial island construction campaign without any contingency plan. Furthermore, these artificial islands were never actually built. Building any seawalls, other protective infrastructure without proper sea level rise will lead to the full consequences of the situation when climate change causes glaciers in the Antarctic and Arctic to melt, resulting in rising sea levels. According to research by the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration's NASA, global sea levels have risen by more than 10 cm since 1992 and continue to rise at a rate of approximately 3.9 mm per year. NASA predicts that by 2050, sea levels along the U.S. coast could be 25 to 30 cm higher than they are today, and global temperatures are causing glaciers to melt, resulting in even faster sea level rise. Compared to the period between 1993 and 2002, sea levels have already doubled between 2013 and 2022, although it is unclear exactly how much this figure will reach by the end of the century. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC has estimated that under the most favorable conditions, sea levels 28% sea levels could rise by up to 5 cm in 2010. In a worst-case scenario where competition and conflict between nations are prioritized over environmental issues, sea levels could rise by as much as 1.2 meters. From these figures, it in Fay 39 is easy to see that China 39's artificial islands, built in the middle of the ocean without any protective systems, will have no chance of resisting erosion and rising sea levels. The problem of rising sea levels is becoming more pressing than ever, considering that China and Fay 39's construction of these artificial islands has destroyed coral reefs and mangrove swamps, which are natural shields protecting coastlines. This is because coral reefs 97% of wave energy before it reaches the shore, protecting coastal communities from storm surges and preventing beaches. In addition, coral reefs allow sediment to form on their shallow and flat parts, from which mangrove swamps can grow and continue to develop. The continuous disruption of wave and storm surge energy occurs because roots and tree trunks absorb some of the water. When combined, coral reefs and flood barriers form the first line of defense against phenomena such as rising sea levels and storm surges. Fortunately, China destroyed this very ecosystem when it began building artificial islands by dredging materials such as sand and rocks from coral reefs and seabeds. In other words, they have destroyed the first line of defense that artificial islands need to withstand a warming climate. Sea levels are rising and storms are becoming stronger and more frequent. To remedy the disastrous consequences of its own actions in 2019, Beijing announced it would begin restoration work on coral reefs in the Spratly Islands. According to the Ministry of Water Resources, facilities for protecting and restoring coral reefs have been built on coral reefs belonging to the Subi and Pinnacle reefs. They will also survey more areas to determine identifying damaged or destroyed coral reefs and applying a combination of natural and artificial methods to help them recover. However, China actually lacks experience or a good track record in this field. Evidence of this is the 2015 statement by their State Oceanic Administration that the construction of artificial islands does not alter the ecological status of the Spratly Islands. At the same time, ships like the Tianjin are relentlessly dredging and crushing coral reefs. China also claims that overfishing and natural causes damaged the coral reefs long before they began construction. With such a dark past in 39's not surprising why not many people believe Beijing in 39's 2019 statement. And even now, about 5 years later, there is still very little evidence to show that they have been actively restoring coral reefs in the Spratly Islands, perhaps due to rising sea levels and the risk of future damage. With the increasing intensity of storms, China will have no choice but to try to fulfill its promise. The mainland has not only invested excessively in both manpower and resources, but also staked its national prestige on the construction and militarization of its artificial islands. What has it gained so far is virtually nothing, and if these islands sink, Beijing will realize it has wasted vast resources only to receive bitter disappointment. However, alongside this terrible waste, another danger lurks. As you may know, the main purpose of building fortifications is not to create an impenetrable defensive line, but rather to force the enemy to deploy more force to that area. This allows the fortification builders to act elsewhere. China and 39's artificial islands serve a similar purpose. However, with the islands deteriorating and being seriously threatened by weather and climate, Beijing will need to constantly concentrate its resources to save this vast area, instead of using these artificial islands as a means of expansion and control in the South China Sea. The fortifications, supposedly supporting the projection of mainland power, are becoming an increasing burden as their maintenance becomes more cumbersome. In a way, the troubles faced by these artificial islands in the South China Sea are predictable, as they represent a part of the history of this nation, which has always been a giant, but has not fully utilized its. China was once the world and 39's richest country in the 19th century, but it failed to effectively use this advantage to compete with or counter the West and Japan. Now, history may be repeating itself. China is once again a rich and powerful nation, but this lion is increasingly facing problems that may prevent it from fully realizing the potential of its restored position on the world stage. Expansion in the South China Sea has relatively clearly demonstrated this long-standing paradox of China, which initially seemed the island-building campaign, aims to consolidate the mainland and F-39's position on the path to regional hegemony, but due to conflicts with neighboring countries, Beijing and 39's competitiveness, combined with internal problems, such as corruption and insufficient technological development as the artificial islands sink to the bottom of the sea. Beijing and 39's efforts will undoubtedly be dragged down with, and F-39's artificial islands have successfully achieved its short-term goals in the South China Sea. However, the game of nations is always a marathon, not a sprint. If these islands cannot last long, they will cost China far more than what it gains. What are your thoughts on Beijing and F-39's strategy of building and militarizing artificial islands? Will they be capable enough to become an effective method of power projection for China and if they are swept away by the South China Sea, what will the situation in the region be like, and what opportunities will Vietnam have to reclaim its sovereign territories? Please feel free to leave your opinions in the comments below. Now, Item 39, I'll subscribe. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos. Have a great day.